In this Path of Exile 2 video, guys, I'm going to be going over the Sorceress class. This video is dedicated for the beginners out there that have chosen the Sorceress as their starter class and is struggling on how to play the Sorceress. This is not an advanced guide whatsoever. This video, the whole point is to show you the ins and outs and how to work the Sorceress and how to dominate enemies with all types of elemental damage. Now, talking about the general playstyle of the Sorceress, your main focus when playing this class is elemental damage, and there's three types here in Path of Exile 2, and that would be cold, fire, and lightning. And then there's also status effects that go along with these elemental types. So with the fire, you'll have ignite, which does a damage over time. With cold, you'll have freeze, so you'll be able to freeze enemies in place so they are pretty much incapacitated for a short period of time. And then you have shock, which comes from lightning. And what shock does, it for 4 seconds when an enemy is under shock, they take 20% additional damage from all sources. Now, when it comes to the passive skill tree for the Sorceress, it starts at the very top of the skill tree. And like always, just for every other class, guys, you guys know that I always go for damage first. And then once you start getting some good gear, then make your way over for some utility. And that would be energy shields or cast speed, extra mana regen and all that good stuff. And then there's this little cluster up here that gives you some fire, lightning, and ice damage. And then once you break off from there, then at the top you can kind of focus on distributing some attribute points and all that fun jazz, and then also focus on just single elements, whichever ones, or you can do like overall elemental damage if you want to use all of the elements. So it depends on how you want to play with the Sorceress, but I would just say grab that first little cluster of elemental damage types and then go off and then pick and choose whichever one that you want to go from there. Now, moving on to the skills for the Sorceress, the first one that I want to go over is called Flame Wall. Now, this is basically just a conjured flame wall that you can actually shoot projectiles through, and this is a nice bread and butter spell, especially for taking out groups of enemies or doing some damage over time. And if you have some other projectiles to shoot through it, such as like ice spear or firebolt, which will do extra damage. So as you can see, I'm chunking ice bolts through the flame wall, and they are actually on fire as well, so it does a split between frost and fire damage. So that is a pretty cool early spell to get early on. And then you can get a support gem for this to actually be able to conjure this in a circle, so it's good for some survivability or just surrounding a little group of enemies or around yourself, so that way every time you do an attack you will always do that extra fire damage. And the next early game skill that I want to talk about, guys, is called Spark. Now, basically what this does is just sends out little projectiles of lightning around you, and they can bounce all around the terrain or between enemies. And it doesn't do a ton of damage, but it's pretty much your bread and butter spell. Just throwing it out there, bounce it between enemies, can clear out trash mobs, and also has that chance to apply the shock status effect, which gives you that pretty much debuffs the enemy, allows you to do 20% more damage to them. But also, like the flame wall, like I said earlier, you can cast this through the flame wall, so that way you have like fire electricity bolts to hit more enemies. And there's also another skill that you can get later on that allows you to shoot spark, and it pretty much enhances the effect of it, and it allows you to hit harder and actually have more bolts of electricity shoot out. And that very skill that I'm talking about, guys, is called Orb of Storms. Basically what this does is it sends out a lightning orb that covers an area of effect, and if you cast electricity spells or lightning spells inside the orb, it will increase the potency and also shoot out additional bolts of lightning to chain between enemies. So what I like to do is I like to cast a flame wall, pop the Orb of Storms, and then just shoot spark, because that way you're doing flame lightning, have more bolts of electricity, and you have that chance of applying the ignite and also the shock effect. And then I like to finish up with some frozen attacks with my ice spears, so that way they get that frozen, and then that way I can take care of the boss pretty easily. Now, one of the other early game skills that I want to talk about, guys, is called Frost Bomb. Now, basically what this does is sends out a little pulse right when you cast it. It pretty much applies a cold exposure, so it slows down enemies a little bit, but it allows them to be opened up to a huge frost attack once it explodes. Now you can do some pretty good damage with this, or some crowd control with this. You can sometimes insta-freeze enemies with this, and what I like doing is I like chucking this out right before I'm coming across a group of enemies, and then once they spot me or start coming towards me, then that's when I start casting the flame wall with the Orb of Storms and Spark, and then I'll just start finishing off with my Ice Spear attack. Now, talking about the primary stat of the Sorceress, so if you haven't noticed by now, the primary stat that you want to focus on is, of course, Intelligence. Intelligence is good because it gives you more mana, so obviously more mana gives you more spells to cast before it is depleted. Strength gives you health. Dexterity will give you accuracy, so you don't really have to focus on accuracy because you're casting spells and not worrying about bows and crossbows. I would say maybe having some strength probably later on, maybe mid-game, because you are a bit squishy when it comes to the Sorcerer, but focusing on Intelligence will give you the chance to learn new spells, and of course allow you to equip higher level gear that have focus on Energy Shield. But again, having a little bit of strength and having the armors that have armor and Energy Shield is not a bad option, because again, you can be a glass cannon if you're just purely focusing on damage. So one thing to keep in mind when you're leveling up your Sorceress. Which leads me into the next segment of this video, which is equipment. So like I said before, you want to focus on items that have Energy Shield and that require Intelligence, but like I said, having a little bit of strength to allow you to equip some armor and Energy Shield armors is not a bad option. But when it comes to the modifiers onto the equipment, you want to look out for points in Intelligence, anything that levels up the spells. So you could have points in the cold spells, fire spells, or lightning spells, health regen, more maximum life, more maximum mana. All of these are great, especially resistances, because you are pretty squishy, like I said, with the Sorceress, so any of these things will be a great addition to your build. Well, that pretty much wraps up the Sorceress beginner guide for Path of Exile 2. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really like playing the Sorceress in this game. You guys know I love playing Intelligence builds. I picked the Witch as my first one, but as I kept playing more and more with the Sorceress, it pretty much became my favorite class to play with, because it has a lot more build variety, and you can pretty much spam all kinds of different spells on the screen and just do absolutely tons of damage. But if you guys want more guides with Path of Exile 2, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so that way YouTube can notify you guys every time our videos go live. And of course, guys, make sure to drop some comments down below if you have any additional tips for the Sorceress, or if you want to share together as a gaming community. I love watching those comments coming through, and I love responding to them. But I'll see y'all in the next video. Deuces.